Hi guys, what's happening? It is Trace Face. Well, in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness, uh, I'm going to be sharing a story with all of you that I've never shared before on this channel. Uh, this story was filmed back in July for a company called Jelly Smack, and they reached out to me. I don't know how they found me or maybe who requested that they interview me, but they did. And I they initially reached out to me and told me that they wanted me to do they wanted to interview somebody on surviving after narcissistic abuse and how you can turn something terrible that's happened to you into something really good. And automatically I thought to myself, well, if there was ever a time for me to reach more of an audience through them, they have a very big audience. Uh, this would be the time to tell this story. So, just a few things. If you are really squeamish after the story, I will actually be showing the pictures. Um, it's a really, really awful story, and one that's very hard to tell. And that's why I knew if I was ever going to tell this story, it was going to be at the most appropriate time. And yeah, there was going to be, either something that would be um, that would say to me that it's the right time to tell this story. There's a few things that went on in the editing that I kind of would have wished that the company had asked me to check it out before they put it up, but that's okay. There's one thing in the way beginning you'll catch it where whoever edited it didn't get it right. It almost sounded like I'm saying that I married my ex-boyfriend, which is not what happened here. And then there's another part where I was talking about how I asked my brother if he ever thought that my ex-boyfriend would have ever hurt me. And they edited that part wrong because they missed the part where my brother said, "Yes, I do." And I said back to him, "Well, don't you I thought you liked him. I thought you really liked him." So those are two parts that were confusing to me because of the way it was edited. Um so I just wanted to clarify that. I'm going to play this for all of you, and yeah, then I'm going to show these pictures. They're quite graphic, so warning to all of you that might be squeamish about the sort of thing that you'll find out in the story, what I'm going to show you. This all happened to me the very last day, first day of the new year, end of 2010 and the beginning of 2011. So I'm going to share the screen, play this for all of you, and then I have a few other things that I'm going to want to talk about with all of you after we see this. So here we go. My My name is Tracy, and today I'm going to be talking about narcissistic abuse and the many layers of what this does to people. We're going back to 2003 when the first one entered my life, and I was only 21, 22 years old. It's interesting. I kind of knew there was something about him that I had already read about, and I had to kind of go back to my college psychology books, and I'm like, oh, there it is, histrionic personality disorder. It's interesting because he sort of primed me perfectly for the second narcissist that came in my life. And what happened there was just downright horrific. I married him and having no idea that he led a double life and was just as probably the worst of them all because of how he was leading this double life. All of my 20s and 30s, unfortunately, were with these people. The first narcissist I dated, I was 22 years old. I was performing in my band. I was doing really well at the time. I just graduated college just upon meeting him. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. And I will just say it like this. My best friend that had known me for 4 years throughout college and outside of college will describe to you that the person she knew, me, at one point was one of the most confident people she ever knew, turned into this person that was walking around daily completely doubting themselves all the time. And to this day, she attributes that person I dated for 4 years to basically prime me and prep me for what was coming down the pipes, down the line with narcissistic abusers and abuse. I had never experienced anything like this in my life. Some of the things he would do to me was to make me feel like I was so incredibly important to him. I mean, he would call obsessively, like it was like incessant phone calls. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not dating anybody else. You're the only one for me. And he was about an hour distance for me. He lived in another city. Our bands were performing often together, so I would have to see him constantly and almost like believe the lies he was telling me, but at the time I didn't know they were lies. And come to find out, it was like me and like 25, 30 other women that he was dancing around with. And you would never have known that based on how he was treating me, how he was contacting me, how he was talking to me. And so when I found that out, it was shocking. I'm not as talented as I think I am or anything like that. He would do. And he would do it often, and he'd do it so subtly. I call it like subtle put downs. I started to like pick apart my appearance. I was like a size 4, and I was sitting there thinking I was fat. I was watching everything I ate. I started to drink more than I ever did. It was things like this that were totally out of my character that I started to kind of go down this rabbit hole of, how do I get out of my own skin? And it was just somebody in your ear all the time, making you doubt yourself. I mean, even simple things like the fact that I believed in God. He used to like to argue with me on the phone. And they also have this thing that they do where they make you feel like they care about you by pretending they're like jealous of everybody you talk to. And that's just another part of their thing that they're doing to trick you into thinking like this is something very special you have with this person. And it is not. Well, what made me finally walk away from him was meeting narc number 2. And narcissist number 2 presented himself as everything opposite of this one I was with. Very open, very honest, very goofy, very outgoing, was in a band too, had their own business with their father, and he was extremely good looking. I was ready to move on from him. But what I didn't know was this one was, and again, at the time, there was not a lot of information about this. I mean, my own therapist, I was going in and telling her some of the things he was telling me about, like some of the thoughts he had, some of the ways he thought, some of the pornography I saw that he was watching, like very dark and disturbing things. And that counselor I was with, she was not educated enough or had enough life experience in order to help me. So what happened to me with him should have never happened. When I first initially met him, years before, like we got together, I remember thinking, I don't know if he's arrogant or he's just a goofball, or both. Like I couldn't tell because I saw both going on when I used to like observe him in the room, But the night that we got together, it just was like we both were available and we weren't with anyone. And I had seen one of my best friends at the time. She was in his band. She was playing drums in his band, and we ran into each other, and there he was, and by the end of the night, he had his arm around me. And I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this. And it happened so fast. I mean, we were inseparable from that night on. Inseparable. He was funny. He was good looking. He had his own business. He had his own house. It was like a fairy tale come true. And everybody in town would be like, my God, you guys are so cool. And, we ate that right up too. I'm young, I'm impressionable. And he's 3 years older than me. That relationship was the first relationship that somebody asked me to move in with them. And being born and raised Catholic, that was a pretty big deal in my family. Me moving in with somebody, you better be prepared to be marrying them in my family. And the reason I did move in with him is because he told me he was ring shopping. He was looking for rings. I thought that we were going to be getting married. So yeah, at 26, I moved in with him. This is circa 2007, and I lived with him for 4 years. So I would say the first time I was truly hurt by him, and like, what the heck? It was like, I want to say 3 months into us dating. I started dating him in April. So by July, he started to get a little distant with me, and I was wondering why. Like emotionally, sexually, something was weird and off. Something told me to check his computer, and I was floored by what I saw. I was so in shock. I remember going to work and like asking people at work, like, what do I do? Is this normal? And I had never experienced somebody with a porn addiction to the point where like the minute you left the house, they were on the computer, like looking at things like that were just not things that 29-year-old man should be looking up. And so that's when I was like, well, I'm going to move out, because obviously you have a problem and I'm not going to deal with this, and I don't want this in a relationship. I would say also, the very first time when I was looking through his stuff, I also found a conversation with his ex-girlfriend that he was with for like almost 10 years before me. And it was like they were talking about me. And so that was really awful. I didn't know any better. I really didn't. I was ignorant to all of this. There was not a lot of information about narcissistic abuse. Well, I would say about 2.5 years into the relationship, I realized that he had an alcohol problem, because he could not come home from work without cracking open a beer. It would change his personality. But the next thing I knew, I was having a problem right alongside with him. Those are the years that I started to drink alone when he would be at band practice. I didn't know how to cope because I kept catching him watching these pornographic videos. It made me feel really insecure. I developed an eating disorder. I had a lot of issues going on within because I just kept believing that he was going to stop, and he wouldn't. And I loved him so much. I mean, I loved him to the point where I just wanted him to change, and I thought he wanted to change too. But when things really took a turn was probably about my 3rd year into dating him. I recognized that his dark side went a lot further than just pornography. One day we were talking, and he said, sometimes I get these violent images and I can't stop them. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I just picture myself harming people, random people in the store, harming my ex. I have visions of cutting her up in a bathtub. And I went to my counselor. She says, well, I've never heard of this. And I came home and I said, do you have visions of doing that to me? And he said, no, I've never had them on you. I've had them on your mother. He goes, I'd never act on them. Well, this is the part that I think everybody needs to pay attention to. When I had enough of the porn, the emotional withholding, the sexual withholding, things like this, telling me that he has these violent images, and I had enough. I decided, hey, we need to separate. I need to move. We're going to separate for right now. But when you do something like that, that is going to enrage them even further, that you are leaving them. You might perhaps, you might potentially be completely away from them. They don't want that. It's a complete shattering of their ego, that you better never leave my crutches. He ended up letting me separate from him, and we saw other people. And when I came back to him and moved back in with him about 6 months later, because he was begging me to come back, I didn't realize what was coming for me. When you leave them and you come back, the punishment is going to be up here and it's going to be really bad. My brother and I were on tour in our band. We were on tour for about a month and we're on the East Coast, so when the van was coming back from the West Coast and starting to come east, my heart just sunk because I knew I'm getting closer and closer to going back to him, and I don't know how I'm going to handle him. I know I have to leave him. And I remember I asked my brother on tour, I said, we were in the car, and I said, Sean, do you ever think that he could hurt me? And my brother, who doesn't comment about anything or anyone, goes, I thought you loved him. I thought you liked him. You get along with him. And he didn't know all this was going on. And he goes, no, I can see it. I can see him doing something. So I knew when I got home, I had to leave him. It was the day of New Year's Eve, would be 2011. I woke up with a really horrible feeling, and I can't describe it. Now I look back thinking this was an omen. And I had this horrible feeling that I got to get out, and I got to get out soon. I had this, it looked like I got stung by bees. My face was swollen, and I didn't know why at this time, at this day. I had used a product that had benzoyl peroxide in it, and I'm allergic to it, and I didn't realize it. So I woke up and I was like, hey, we're not going to no New Year's Eve parties tonight. I look like I got stung by bees. And he was like, no, Tracy, we are going. He goes, I am so sick and tired of you. You don't want to ever do anything. You don't want to go anywhere. You don't want to do anything. And we are going. And I said, well, you know what? Then we need to compromise. Like no after parties. When the bar closes, we go home. That's the compromise. Because I don't want to drink. And I remember begging him, can't we just go to your parents for the night and just spend time New Year's Eve at your parents? I had this horrible feeling. And he was like, no, we're going out. We went out. We didn't have dinner. And his friends were buying us shots. And the next thing I remember is we're back in our apartment. He had bought a duplex. So we lived on the top floor of the apartment. And he was putting a pizza in the oven, yelling at me like, oh, poor baby didn't get her food, and he was putting a pizza in the oven. We had a Doberman. He didn't clean the oven. All of a sudden there was a fire in the oven. And I'm like screaming like, there's a fire in the oven. He's like, go out, just shut the hell up. Now he's really drunk. About 6 months beforehand, we were in a fight and he looked at me dead straight in the eye and he goes, I don't care about anything other than stabbing you and stabbing the dog. What people should know is if they talk like this, they're thinking like this, and they're going to do them. And again, I didn't know this. We got into this argument. I was at his apartment, and I don't even know what it was about. I remember saying to him, you don't care about me. You don't care about me. And it's so evident to me. I'm like, look at you right now. And he would do this thing where he'd stare at me, and he'd like stare like right through me and just not say anything. And so he was just staring at me, and I looked at him and I'm like, don't you feel anything? Like, what are you even thinking right now? He goes, the only thing I'm thinking about is stabbing you and stabbing the dog. And I was in such shock that even rolled off his tongue. I grabbed my purse and I ran out of the house. I was in shock. I remember calling like one of those hotlines for abuse and asking the woman, like, is this normal for someone to say this? And she says to me, this is a person that you brush your teeth next to, you go to sleep next to every day, that and they're saying things like that to you? And I'm like, yeah, my safety is just like completely taken from me. So that was 6 months before this incident happened that he said it. He said something of the nature of what he wanted to do to me. The fire alarm went off. Because it was so loud in a very small space, the dog just started peeing on the floor. So he completely loses it, starts screaming at the top of his lungs. I thought, he's going to kill me or the dog. I just sat there and I watched him take a fit. And I had watched him take a few of these in the 4 years I was with him. But I remember thinking, I got to get the dog and me safe. But before I took the dog into the back room and locked the door, I looked at him and I was like, this is over. Like, you and I are done. Tomorrow I'm moving all my stuff out and we are done. And like, you don't say, now I know you don't say that to somebody like him. You just don't. So that's a whole other thing I would tell people is you don't tell someone your plans and you don't tell them you're leaving them. I took the dog back into the other room and I locked the door and I waited for him to calm down. And I figured the dog, at this point, we probably were in there for like 45 minutes. And I'm like, the dog has got to go out. And so I came out, came out with the dog, and he was in the kitchen, and he opens up the oven. And the craziest part of this is I thought it for a minute. I had my back turned to get the dog's leash on him, and I had this weird thought, and as I'm thinking it, he takes the pizza out of the oven with his bare hands and goes, "Here's your effing pizza," and wails it at me with my back turned. So this is a 400-degree oven with cheese and sauce, and hitting me in the back of my head. I had a tank top on that came like halfway down my back, so it really literally smacked right onto my back, and it splattered, into my head, my hair, backs of my arms, my legs, and I screamed like I've never screamed before in my entire life. I mean, we had neighbors downstairs. Nobody called the police. I called a few people that were not available to me. Then I called the police and I said, "I can't get up off the ground. I don't know what to do." I said, "He didn't mean to do," I'm lying for him now. I said, "He didn't mean to do it. He just tripped and a pizza fell on my back." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know what to do." And they're like, "We'll be right there." No, we lived about 3 blocks from a hospital, so I could hear the ambulance coming. And as the ambulance is coming, he picks me up and throws me into the shower, or puts freezing cold water on it, which we learned later on that is the worst thing you can do for a burn. And I'm screaming. I mean, that blood-curdling scream I can still hear in my head to this day. And I'm crawling on the floor to get away from him. I'm like, "Get away from me." And he's cleaning up the place like it's a crime scene. So when the ambulance got there, the cops were the first to show up. And I swear they knew by my phone call that something was very wrong. And they answered the phone and they were like, "Ma'am," I put a nightgown, I put a robe on, a bathrobe. And they're like, "Ma'am, let me see your back." And I, pushed it down, and they looked and they were like, "What happened here?" And I remember one of the things I had learned when I was taking these courses to try to learn more about him was, if they do something like this, you have to make them accountable. So I looked at him and I said, "You tell them what happened." And he looked at them and he goes, "I threw a pizza at her." And they looked at him and they were like, "That's a felony." And the handcuffs immediately went on him. He went up to the car and I went to the ambulance, and I've never seen him since. It was a very daunting and excruciating, you were treated like you were the problem. His lawyer just continued for 2 years straight, just continued to push back the case, knowing full well that you're going to be moving on with your life. And in 2 years' time, you're not even going to want to fight this person in a court of law. So the charges remained, they stayed on his record. And by 2 years after this happened, I was already married. I was trying to move on with my life. And I just remember after that whole thing happened, and I could tell you a boatload of things more that happened. I mean, that night he also tried to strangle me. Before he threw the pizza at me, I got out of the strangle because I learned dealing with how to get out of a strangle. And he was screaming and going crazy. And that's when he turned around. It's so hard to remember all this, but that's when he turned around and started to strangle me over the table. So I instinctively just started to wail him, to get him out of my face. And I'm hitting him with all of my might. And I looked down and he was cowering like a little child. And I saw the child in him that was abused, because I know he was abused as a kid. And that's when I looked at him and I said, "This is so messed up. We are done here. We're done. Tomorrow I'm getting all my stuff and we are so done." So they were partially 3rd-degree burns. They put me on, it was either Percocet or oxycodone, I don't know which one. And after 5 days of taking that, I ended up in the hospital. I almost died again because I had a very bad allergic reaction to it, and I couldn't breathe in the middle of the night. So I was rushed to the hospital again. It was a male nurse that was in the hospital. Wow. I'm sitting there with all these burns on me. It was so painful. I can't even describe the pain. The male nurse came over to me, and I was on the phone with his mother. I was worried about him being in jail. All I was worried about as I'm sitting here with 2nd and 3rd-degree burns on my back and other areas of my body was, he's in jail, how are we going to get him out? And I called his mother, and his mother had no idea that he was still drinking. She thought that he stopped drinking, 4 years ago when he lied and told her he did. And I'm like, "Your son's an alcoholic, and this is what happened tonight." So she was so delusional about her son that she says to me, "So let me get this straight. He drank, you both were drinking, he strangled you, you punched him, he threw a pizza, and now he's in jail?" I go, "Yeah, man. Yeah, that's what happened." When I got off the phone with her, the nurse looked at me and he goes, "Is that his mother you were just on the phone with?" I said, "Yeah." And my parents had just walked in the room. He goes, "Can I talk to your daughter for a minute?" He goes, "I don't care if you sit here and listen to this or not." My parents were like, "Yeah." He goes, "Let me tell you something." He goes, "I've been doing this job for almost 40 something years." He says, "The next time I'm going to see you in this room is in a body bag." Because I've been watching this kind of thing my whole life. He said, "And you have no idea, if you take this man back, next time I'm going to see you in this hospital is in a body bag." And my father speaks up, and my father's like, "She's coming back home with us." I'm going to tell you what, of all people, all therapists, all my friends, all the people I talk to, that man was the man that, like, I mean, to this day, I need to go find that man and thank him, because it was like, nobody was getting to me. Nobody was getting to me. So the crazy part was, I wasn't even 6 months out of that situation. And let me just tell you what, like I was saying, the way that the detectives treat you, the lawyers, I was changed. I was switched over to different advocates for me like 5 times. One would say, "Oh yeah, this is a case that's going to, he's going to get jail time." Another one would say, "Well, he's never had an offense before, so he's not going to get jail time." They would all tell me something different. And it just beats you down. You don't even want to try. You don't even want to advocate for yourself. And I went in to get paperwork. And my boss, I will never forget this as long as I live. And remember, this is how you were treated back then. This is before Me Too. This is before people realized that women have been going through this, that we have a voice, that we need to speak out against these things. My boss looked at me and she goes, "I can't imagine what you must have said to make him do that." And I was just like, that ought to tell you how ignorant our society is. So 6 months later, I was moving on with my life. I was making new friends. I made this new friend, and he was part of the scene. I never met him before, and he was like, "Oh, let's go out to breakfast." He wanted to do different things. So me and my best friend at the time, we met him out for breakfast on a Saturday. It was like a Saturday or Sunday, and it was the afternoon, and he was a bartender. So he was like, "Oh, you guys want to go get a few drinks on the water before I have to go back into work?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I walked into this bar, and as God is my witness, I saw this guy. He was sitting all alone at the bar. He was like the only one there at like 2:00 in the afternoon. And I took one look at him, and my spirit just told me to like run. And I went in the bathroom, and I was like, and I heard my friend say, "Oh, hey, so-and-so." So he knew him. And I was like, "Oh no, who is this guy?" And I went to the other side of the bar to order my drink. And this hand comes around the corner. I was like, "Oh, congratulations on winning the rock hunt." He knew about my band. I looked him in the eye, and that was it. I was like afraid of him. He, in my eyes, was like the nicest looking guy I had ever seen. He was down to earth. He was funny. He was exciting. And of course, I felt so comfortable with him, I started to tell him everything that had just happened to me. So he played that role. I'm going to be your knight in shining armor. I'm going to take you away from all this hurt, pain, suffering. And within 3 months of us dating, he asked me to marry him. Within a year, we were married. But what I didn't know was he was going to be the worst of all 3 of them. I would rather have a pizza thrown at me and deal with physical pain of burns than to be burnt in the way that he burned me in the end. And it took about, maybe a good year and a half to really see that he's a fraud, that he lies about everything, that he is literally living this double life. Little did I know that my soon-to-be husband at his bachelor party was going to Asian spas, sleeping with strippers, and God knows what else happened that night. I had no idea until he told me that 4 years later into our marriage. So even though this would have been the hardest decision I ever had to make in my life, because he kept convincing me he could change, and he didn't want to. He entertained a lot of people behind my back, to the point where after I divorced him, many people came forward with stories. He had an extreme dark side. I'm sure a lot of you out there that have learned about narcissistic abuse can only imagine what he was doing and the kind of double life he was leading. But nobody deserves to be lied to about anything. So once I got away from him, I decided I'm going to tell my story on YouTube. The most freeing part about this was nobody knew I had this channel. Not my friends, not my family. So I just felt like I'm going to tell my story. Within 2 years of that, I have my own business now, and I'm helping people all around the globe. But it started from a very sincere place, and my sincerity was, I wanted, if I could help one person not go through what I just went through for 20 years of my life, I would do it in a heartbeat. I know people that are full of crap, and I know the signs now that I can teach other people so that they can look out for this and be like, oh no. For you women out there that are involved with somebody like this, you're going to waste countless years of your life. You're going to waste precious years of your life. You're going to waste childbearing years of your life on a person who is telling you every single day by their actions they don't want to change. Somebody that can do these types of things I'm describing today, that's an evil person. I also just want people to know, like, don't be embarrassed to go out there and get the help. Reach out to someone that's been through it, because that's crucial. I feel like everybody out there should talk to somebody who has personally experienced narcissistic abuse, because I truly don't believe you could actually help someone, coach someone, counsel someone on this insidious type of abuse unless you have been through it yourself, because there's so many layers to this and how these people trick you. You know, no matter what, it's so hard to talk about that story, and it's hard to remember everything because I feel like, yeah, I did try to bury a lot of those awful, awful memories. But before I make some comments about it, um, I'm going to show you the pictures. And again, it's you're going to see the first picture I'm going to show you is of the strangle marks on my neck. There is a picture out there of my eyes. I think the detective has that of my eyes completely bloodshot from being strangled. Um, and then I will show you the pictures of the burns. So I'm going to get off here so I can show you that, and I'll come right back on. And if you don't want to see that something like this, then please don't watch this next part. Move along to a few more minutes. Yeah. Um, Not only is this story the perfect time to tell for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is the month of October, but it also involves a story that involves alcohol. So, to honor my friend Mark, whose life was taken 2 weeks ago from a drunk driver, I also feel that this story is quite appropriate to hear. As you can see, my life as a musician, um, and my life socially for many many years of my life was surrounded and involved with alcohol. And as you can see, more times than not, um, nothing good is going to come from a life that is around alcohol usage, which can oftentimes, more often than not, turn to alcohol abuse. Um, yeah, I mean, that was 13 years ago. And I'm going to tell you what, speaking of alcohol, I'll tell you, just listening to that right now, the triggers I had that went off in my brain, that man, I could use a drink right now. It's stuff like that. Having to remember that stuff, um, having to tell the stories, having to try to remember all the details. As you can see, I even forgot the part right before he threw the pizza of him strangling me. It's like it's really hard to tell a story like that. To this day, 13 years later, and I have a hard time telling that story. Um, I can remember after it happened, I was in such shock. I can remember the pain that was going on inside of my head mentally was so much greater, like I said, than the pain, the physical pain. I couldn't believe that somebody would want to do that to me. I think that's the part that I couldn't wrap my head around. How did I just spend 4 years with someone who really wanted to do something like that to me? And what I want to say, that I didn't, this was put together so quick. As you can see, um, these stories, they try to get as much information as possible and get the story out, and it's quickly edited and such. But I want people out there to know that a lot of times narcissistic individuals could potentially be with you for, I mean, I have clients, you guys, that I can now speak about, that literally were with their partners for 30, 40 something years. And when the partner, when they decided that they were going to leave the relationship, is the first time they saw their partner get violent. So what am I saying? You can never underestimate a narcissist. Never. I believe all domestic violence incidences have to do with a narcissistic personality type, because in order to hurt somebody to those lengths, you have to be uh, a narcissist. You have to be, or what I talk about on this channel as living in the darkness, living on the dark side, engaging in darkness in their life, and in doing very bad things. And that's how they're able to do things like this, or to even have the thoughts to do something like this. Could you imagine? I mean, I was getting insight the whole day. That was the Holy Spirit trying to get to me. And I didn't have my relationship with God in order at that time in my life at all. But those omens I was getting all day, from the story that you just heard me say, I was getting these omens, like, you shouldn't go out tonight. They were strong. And so I want to tell you guys to listen to that too. And if you're getting these feelings that this person could potentially hurt you, you got to get out, you guys. You have to. Trust me, please. He wanted to kill me that night. And rest assured, he wasn't able to do it with strangling me, burning me. My heart, I didn't even get to talk about my heart when I got to the hospital. Um, I could have had a heart attack and died. And then, 5 days later, I had a reaction to Percocet. So that was the other part that was edited weird. It says I almost died the second time. I had an allergic reaction to Percocet. I had never taken that before. And by the fifth day of me taking that, I ended up in the ER overnight. I woke up overnight and I had a rash on me from head to toe. I looked like Freddy Krueger from the top to the bottom of myself. My skin was a full on rash, and I couldn't breathe. So my parents rushed me to the hospital, and they had to put me on Benadryl for, like, I don't even know how many hours. And then they released me that morning, and I went back home, and it happened again that Saturday night. It happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night. I still had those drugs in my system, and I couldn't breathe. And they told me if I hadn't got there when I didn't wake up when I did, I would have died. So, yeah, these people bring very, very bad things, very, very bad things. The last thing I want to say that I made a note as I was watching this again, um, with all of you just now, that nurse, was by far an angel. Um, and that was the nurse that first saw me when I got to the hospital with the burns. Um, and that was at Rhode Island Hospital. Um, he interceded in a way that nobody had. And something snapped for me when he spoke to me the way he did, that if I go back to him, the next time he's going to see me is in a body bag, because he sees this all the time. And I believed him. As an emergency RN, I 100% believed him. So that was a message sent directly from God that, yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think back. I At one point in the company I was working for, we had all different people coming in looking for jobs, on different programs. People that were Most of the people I worked with were people that had disabilities, but some people were coming in through DCF, and some people were coming in through domestic violence agencies when I first started working there. And I remember listening to these women's stories, you know, and thinking to myself, how could any woman allow herself to be treated like this, to the point that it gets that they're allowing a man to beat them? Well, guys, you know, I'm educated. I was born and raised in a good family. I now understand this whole thing called a demonic attachment, and what it does, and how you are so attached to someone that it makes absolutely no sense. And you just you know look at me, I was still trying to cover for him. I mean, and if I didn't have an automatic 8-year restraining order on him, or I think it was 5 years, something like that, 8 years, excuse me, God knows how many times I would have probably gone back to him. I mean, that's scary, but it's the truth. You're you're not in your right mind dealing with people like this. And what they do is they go from hot to cold so often, and they try to tell you, I don't want to be like this. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it, or I know I need to get help. And then they're crying in your lap, literally. The time that he and I had separated, I felt such a draw to him. I mean, I went back to him. Uh, I think that very last time, as a matter of fact, it was me that wanted to go back. I was the one that was like, I really want to see if we can make this work. I thought maybe us separating, a lot of us think this, maybe the separation will have done some good, and he's going to finally realize, that he's got to treat me better. No, not with this type, you guys. No. So, yeah, I this was the time finally to tell such a horrible story. And I hope that anybody that listened to this tonight from my channel, or listened to it on the other on the uh, Jelly Smack, I hope and I pray that you get out, and you get out before it's too late, and before something like this happens to you that didn't need to happen. I'm going to tell you what, the other crazy thing that happened, uh, I was working out of Providence, Rhode Island, and my insurance was, I thought, really crappy. Um, and come to find out, I was able to go see a burn specialist out of Boston. Uh, Rhode Island Hospital, their follow up care with me was horrific. As a matter of fact, they told me to call that Monday, because nobody told me when to switch the bandages, how much you had to do it, how often, when, all this. And no one told me that. And so when I called on Monday, they made me wait, I remember, for 40 minutes on the phone. I was driving to my doctor's, and they made me wait on the phone for 40 minutes, and someone got on the phone and goes, "Oh, there's no one here at the burn unit for another 2 weeks. So you're going to have to wait." What? I'm sorry. And they, like, literally just were like, "Sorry," and hung up. I called Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Again, this is 2011, and they got me in the very next day. Those doctors created a solve just especially for the types of burns that I had, which were mostly second, but some parts were third degree burns. And they saved my skin. Those doctors saved my skin. And thankfully, I think it was narc number one. He was still in my life. I think it was narc number one that told me to go to Boston and that they would be able to get me in. And he was right. So he had some purpose in my life. I think that was it. Yeah, you know, a lot of people in the music scene found out he did that and didn't care, while others backed me up 100% and said, I will never, ever speak to him again. He ended up moving to New York not long after that. Um, and from what I understand, he's been there ever since. And thank God, because that was just another person I don't have to worry about running into. Um, yeah, pretty horrific, right? Also, I also had put in that interview and it didn't make the cut. They needed it to be a certain amount of minutes, I think 20 something minutes, or 20 minutes. He did have a record of abusing his ex-girlfriend. But it was so many years ago. It was like when he was 18. So he has a history. He had a history of violence. And so that's in him. And that nurse said to me, he is an alcoholic. I remember he said this to me. He's an alcoholic. He's going to drink until his teeth fall out of his skull, and he's just going to keep on drinking because that's what he is and that's what he does. And he said, and he's going to kill you. Yeah. So God saved me and saved my life and made it so that, like this episode was supposed to be about, how you are able to turn something so horrible around for yourself and do good with it. And that's what I'm trying to do. I will be on much more than I have been. I needed a little time to process my friend's passing and some other things going on. And but I am going to make a point to keep showing up for all of you, keep trying to spread the word and the message and the education around these topics, and feel comfortable enough to be able to do these things and tell such hard stories. I thank you for listening and for being there throughout my entire, you know, time here on YouTube, and for all of you that have helped me to get here in this place of being able to have my own business and help others get out and stay out and do the right thing and make the changes that you know you need to make for yourself within, which is the most important part, right? We can't change these people, but we can change what it is we're going to do with what has been dealt to us and what we're going to do with that going from here on out. Well, I'm Trace Face, and as always, it's time we face the truth together.